We have what looks to be a very busy and competitive Republican primary shaping up in New Hampshire's 1st Congressional District. And right now, the average age of the declared candidates is under 30. One of those helping to keep that average in the 20s is State Rep Tim Baxter of Seabrook. Thanks for joining us this morning, Representative.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
So this is probably the first time many voters in CD1 and across New Hampshire are hearing from you. So tell us a little bit about who you are and why you're running for Congress.
Absolutely. So I'm a state representative right now, but I first got involved in the community not through politics, but by helping to raise money for nonprofits. But the more involved I got helping charities, the more I saw corrupt career politicians ignoring people and taking advantage of people, especially those that are least fortunate in our community. So especially as someone that's young, I felt compelled to get involved in our political system to try to do my part to fight back against career politicians. I'm a conservative fighter. I'm a staunch advocate for liberty and freedom. And if given the opportunity to represent New Hampshire in Congress, I'll continue what I've done as a state representative, and I'll be a conservative fighter in Washington, D.C.
So you just turned 24 years old. Happy birthday, by the way. You'll be able to meet the constitutional threshold to be in Congress, turning 25 next year. But what do you say to voters who look at you and say, gosh, we think you just don't have enough life experience to go to Congress?
Well, look, I represent a district that elected me. I'm a small business owner. I restore and renovate rental properties across New Hampshire. And then I also run a small nonprofit called Second Chances that helps people struggling with addiction. And after my experience helping charities in my community, I just really felt compelled to do even more. And it's an issue that's hit Seabrook and all of New Hampshire really hard. And when you see so many people that are struggling with addiction, you have to do something. But you know, I would say to the voters, you should vote for whoever you think is the best candidate. I don't believe you should vote for me because I'm young, or you should not vote for someone because they're old. I think you should vote for whoever you think the best person is, and I hope to have the opportunity to represent you in Washington, D.C.
You mentioned the opioid crisis. What would be your top issues if you're elected?
Well, there's so many crucial issues right now. I'd say number one, the national debt. Our national debt is $28.427 trillion. We're out of money. We've got to get spending under control. I'm a staunch advocate for protecting the Second Amendment. I believe we should never take away the rights of law-abiding gun owners to defend themselves and their families. And then also another thing I would say would be is medical freedom, which is a crucial issue right now with COVID. I've been, as a state representative, working to stop vaccine passports. I introduced the legislation to stop vaccine passports in this state because I don't think people should be discriminated against because of the medical choices they make. So there's so many crucial issues right now, but those are three issues that are top of my mind.
Yeah, you know, while we're on the issue of the pandemic right now, you've been pretty outspoken about Dr. Anthony Fauci, the medical advisor to the president. Social media posts recently saying, quote, Anthony Fauci needs to be in prison, period. What's the criminal charge that you think he should face?
Well, look, let me be very clear. Dr. Fauci lied under oath to Congress, which is a criminal offense, about gain-of-function research. The NIH funded gain-of-function research, which was conducted in the Wuhan lab in China, and Dr. Fauci lied about it under oath to Congress. Now, just like anyone else, he should have his, hearing in court, and he should be given an investigation, but it's pretty cut and dry.
Do you think, though, that that's a slippery slope for America, that the idea that professionals whose job it is to provide counsel or advice to the president, if they're wrong or if they have the wrong messaging, that somehow they should face a consequence like that? Because if you're going to draw the line, if you're going to arrest Fauci, it's hard to draw that line just at him, right?
Well, that's not wrong advice or wrong opinion. He lied about something the NIH did. The NIH funded gain-of-function research, and he lied about it under oath to Congress, and he knew about it. And that's not the first time Fauci has lied about medical advice. This happened with masks as well. He said that masks did not help people, and he encouraged people not to get masks. And this was back in 2020. So this is a repeated pattern, but again, with gain-of-function research, he lied about the NIH funding gain-of-function research in the Wuhan lab in China. So it's not medical advice. It's not about his opinion or his political ideology. It's about him providing truthful information when he took an oath to provide truthful information in front of Congress.
There are already 2 Trump administration alums in this race, and there could be others who jump into the CD1 Republican primary who have connections of some kind to the former president. The former president's endorsement, it's likely in a very crowded race, it could be the #1 factor in deciding who wins this thing. Does it make sense that one person's viewpoint, an out-of-stater at that, should have that kind of sway over the party that's supposed to be about the power of the individual?
Well, look, I think, the president is going to have an impact on a lot of voters because a lot of voters support the America First agenda. I support the America First agenda. Talking about our foreign policy, making sure we put Americans first and our veterans and our troops first, making sure that we fight corrupt career politicians. One of the things I support is term limits, because we need to get rid of every single corrupt career politician in this country. And in terms of the impact that Donald Trump has, look, it's not my say. Voters can look at every single candidate. They can look at all the people who weigh in on the candidates, and then they can make the decision and vote for whoever they think is the best candidate.
Representative, what kind of consequences do you think the Biden administration should face for its handling of the withdrawal from Afghanistan?
Well, look, I think Biden has clearly demonstrated that he's incompetent. This withdrawal was very poorly executed. And just to put it simply, when you have 2,500 troops in Afghanistan and you pull them out, and then you have to put 6,000 back in to secure the airport, obviously that's a botched withdrawal. So I think a lot of people are wondering now, can we trust Joe Biden to handle future foreign policy crises? Administrations frequently will have multiple times throughout the 4-year period where there are crises around the world. And people are wondering, rightfully so, is Biden up to the job? To be quite frank, I think Biden should resign because I don't think he's capable of being president of the United States of America right now.
Do you think some of the troops should have stayed, that there should still be a residual force in Afghanistan?
Well, look, I believe what Donald Trump says when it comes to our foreign policy, that we should put America first. And Donald Trump said that we should end the war in Afghanistan. I think he's right. We can't even secure our own border right now. That should be the first thing on our mind. But when it comes to Afghanistan, what's happening right now, we need to make sure that we're getting Americans out, that we're taking care of our allies, that we're putting our troops and our vets first. But now this has turned into a whole crisis, and we see ISIS and what's going on right now. They are growing in Afghanistan, and we left billions of dollars of our Humvees and weapons in Afghanistan. And this is the exact same mistake Obama made in Iraq, which allowed ISIS to grow in Iraq during his presidency. So I think it's a very complicated situation now, but I do agree with Donald Trump when it comes to foreign policy that we should put America first.
Do you support bringing Afghan refugees to New Hampshire?
Well, I think when it comes to refugees, that we need to make sure that we 100% vet them. We cannot allow any refugees into New Hampshire that could potentially commit acts of terrorism. So we need to strictly vet every single potential refugee that's coming from Afghanistan.
What about immigration policy more broadly? What's your position on, obviously you disagree with the Biden administration, but how much overlap there do you have with Trump in terms of the wall, family separation policy, things like that?
Well, look, I believe we need to secure our border. And when it comes to having an America First foreign policy, we should be putting troops on our southern border. That should be our #1 priority, is before we go invading other countries, we need to make sure we secure our own border. And we see illegal drugs flowing over our southern border. And it's not just impacting southern United States. It's impacting all throughout the United States, and it's impacting New Hampshire. Illegal drugs that's coming over our border, fentanyl, that's hurting people right here in New Hampshire, which is why we need to focus on securing our border and building the wall.
Well, Representative, what about the family separation policy, though? Do you think that should be reinstituted?
Look, I think it's something we have to look at. I think our first priority when it comes to immigration should be securing the safety of Americans. Our immigration policy should not be determined by, first and foremost, people that are coming in. Look, we accept 1 million people legally every year into the United States. We have a very generous immigration policy. And our first priority should be making sure we do what's best in terms of the interests of citizens of the United States with our immigration policy.
All right, Representative Tim Baxter, candidate for Congress on the GOP side in the 1st District. Thanks for joining us on Close Up.
Thank you for having me.